Okay, now to the second part of our module on public narrative. Let's look at the science of inspiration. What makes an inspiring story? How do stories affect us at the level of our brains? Well, we saw in the last video that stories like the story of David and Goliath follow a three-part structure. And this is a very, very common three-part structure that anthropologists have observed in many different human cultures. That stories begin with trouble, stories begin with a challenge, with something unexpected, something risky or dangerous. That the most important moment in a story is a moment of choice, where the story seems to slow down and we focus in on a difficult choice that a hero or a heroine has to make without knowing what's going to happen. A choice really that's about uncertainty and how we draw on values and principles that can help us meet that moment and manage that uncertainty and make the right choice. And the heroes, the protagonists, are often flawed. Sometimes they're, superheroes, but even superheroes are presented as having flaws, from Gilgamesh to Batman. And so what we see in the most inspiring stories are heroes or protagonists who are forced to overcome their weakness or overcome their flaws, and who find themselves transformed by the experience of having to do something difficult, make a difficult choice. The stories that we find traditionally satisfying are the ones in where a positive action, an action that represents the values of our group, whether that's generosity or courage or loyalty, honesty, that these values are rewarded by the end of the story, by what happens. And that those in the story that are abusing these values get some kind of punishment. Now, not every story has a happy ending, of course, but traditionally the stories that are passed down for centuries and centuries have this kind of structure. Interestingly, the more storytelling and storytellers there are in a culture, there may also be more pro-social behaviors. There's been a correlation found between the prevalence of storytelling and more pro-social behaviors in that society. So stories transmit these values through this kind of structure, and maybe they can help reinforce the kind of behaviors that we want to see in society, of people helping one another. In the 1990s, in a laboratory at the University of Parma in Italy, researchers were studying the brains of chimpanzees. And they were using wires connected to the brains of these primates, and were using the wires to create images of the brains of these primates without hurting them. And one day, a research assistant came back from the lunch break with a nice Italian gelato, which the Italians do very well. And she saw that one of the primates was looking at her, and she looked at the image of the primate's brain, and what she saw was very unusual. That the primate was not eating the gelato; she was just the monkey was just looking at her, and yet on the image of the primate's brain was as if it was the primate who was eating. It was exactly the same pattern that would show up if it was the monkey that was eating the ice cream. And so this accidental discovery led to the discovery of a phenomenon called mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are a kind of a cognitive circuit, a cognitive capacity that allow us to mirror, create a simulation of what our others are feeling. And other mammals have this, but it requires a kind of a direct connection to the experience by seeing it. Whereas we, as human beings, because of our ability to tell stories, we can stimulate the mirror neurons of people around us just by talking, just by telling you about something that's happened to us, whether it was a great meal that we had or a terrifying experience getting lost in a city. That telling a story in an exciting way, even though I'm just speaking words to you, can create instantaneously, without even wanting it, a simulation of that experience. So if I tell you something that's frightening, you will start to physically react in a way that you are feeling like you're having the experience yourself. And scientists hypothesize that this quality of human beings was adaptive, meaning it helped our ancestors by creating instantaneous bonds between the person telling the story and the person hearing the story, so that in the act of storytelling, we are creating the social bonds that we need if we're going to survive a difficult winter or work together in a crisis. And how do mirror neurons work? Mirror neurons work through detail. So if you think about the famous scene in Jurassic Park where the dinosaurs are first coming to attack the car with the children, how do we know the dinosaurs are coming? Because the cup of water, just the surface of the water starts shaking with the dinosaur's foot in the distance. And so it's these little details that you will remember long after the movie's finished. So as you tell a story, think about what is the little detail, the visual detail that you can tell about the story that will spark the mirror neurons of your audience. That it's these little details, these textures, that is what good storytellers use to create an emotional response. And we often call this rule show, don't tell. C.S. Lewis, the famous children's author, described this principle of show, don't tell in this way. Instead of telling us a thing was terrible in your story, describe it so that we'll be terrified. Don't say it was delightful. Make us say, delightful, when we've read the description. Right? So you don't want to tell someone the meaning of the story. You want them to feel the meaning through the details that you show them about how the hero feels, what the hero is seeing, what the hero is encountering. So this is just one example of a physical reaction that good stories create. And there are actually a whole range of chemicals, hormones we call neurotransmitters, these chemicals running through our brain that activate our attention, that change the physical state of our bodies. So for example, stories that are suspenseful, that are dramatic, that we don't know what's going to happen, stimulate a hormone called dopamine. And dopamine creates focus and motivation and helps us remember things. So it's a physical reaction. It makes us more alert. When we tell a story of someone vulnerable, a child about to get eaten by a dinosaur, that creates a rush of what we call of a hormone called oxytocin, which is the same hormone that new mothers feel when they see their babies. And this again is something that both men and women have, and that is a way of creating bonds between people. Laughter, humor, creates a reaction of endorphins. Laughter naturally creates this physical response of endorphins running through our brain, which have been shown to relax us, make us more creative, and again stimulate bonding. So humor creates a physical response in our bodies. And threats, when we feel like we're under attack, also creates a physical reaction. Hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. These is what creates an alertness response. It arouses our body into a potential to run away or to fight. And some people love this feeling, and this is why some people love horror movies, for example, is because they like that feeling of adrenaline or going on roller coasters. And finally, stories that talk about pride and belonging to a group have been shown to stimulate a hormone called serotonin. So all of these hormones have multiple functions in the brain, but this is just some examples of how certain aspects of a story can create a physical response in the brain. And good storytellers are not just giving you lots of information. That's not what a good story does. A good story mixes suspense with humor, with empathy and threat, and a feeling of pride or belonging. That these parts of a story literally light up the inside of your brain as if it's in a fireworks show. So inspiration is a physical reaction. It's not just something magic and invisible. When you inspire someone, you are creating a physical festival in their brain. Public narrative. This is a picture of it belongs to a story that I tell of my time in India when I was 27. And if you are part of a workshop in person, you'll hear me tell that story. So public narrative is a very old, in some way, a very old tradition, taps into a very old tradition of storytelling for a purpose, that brings people together for a purpose. It has been developed in its modern form by Marshall Ganz, who lived in Germany as a child, and as a young man dropped out of Harvard to join the civil rights movement in the South, registering voters, and then worked with a great civil rights leader named Cesar Chavez in the fields of California, helping migrant farm workers organize and protect their rights to a decent life. He then applied these skills of organizing and movement building to the realm of politics in California, and then later finished his degree and joined Harvard Kennedy School as a professor, where he's been teaching for the last 30 years. And I met Marshall first on the campaign of Howard Dean, who was governor of Vermont, running for president in 2003, 2004, and learned about public narrative on that campaign. And then this became a fundamental method of the organizing strategy of Barack Obama's campaigns in 2008 and 2012. Marshall teaches a tradition. Public narrative is a part of a larger tradition we call community organizing. Community organizing is the art of creating power where it doesn't exist, facilitating social change through a series of nonviolent methods that mobilize people to build power and change the rules of the game to help those in need. And he describes community organizing as using the head, the heart, and the hands. The heart, by the word heart, he means the values that are best expressed in the stories we tell. By head, he means the strategies that are needed to convince people that working together will produce something real for them. And there's these other community organizing skills like theory of change, power mapping, building coalitions, crafting messages. And hands are the actions on the ground and how we learn from those actions collectively. And importantly in this tradition, a leader is not someone who is creating the strategy and telling everyone else what to do. A leader is not someone with a special diploma, a special degree, a special CV, special office. No, leadership is a practice. A leader is anyone of any age, any background, any education level. A leader is anyone who takes responsibility to enable others to achieve a common goal in the face of uncertainty. This is what leadership is. And the greatest movements for social change in history have been those that have distributed leadership widely, that have had maybe one or two charismatic leaders that are visible, but have hundreds or thousands of leaders behind them working together. This is what he calls interdependent leadership. It's a different kind of model from groups that, with a leader who tries to centralize power, or groups that try to work without any kind of structure at all. Neither of those two models is ultimately as effective, argues Marshall, as groups that are built around interdependent leadership. In this model, we often call the snowflake, because as you see here, it looks like a flocon de neige, like a snowflake where there's a central team that connects outward, and each leader is recruiting new leaders and helping other people cultivate their leadership, and those people go out and help other people join and grow as leaders. So that it naturally grows in this structure like a snowflake. So public narrative is based first on what not to do. An inspiring story is not just a list of things that happen to you. An inspiring story is not a list of your qualifications and why people should follow you. An inspiring story is not a transaction that, okay, if I do this for you, you will do this for me. No. That public narrative is built on three intersecting types of stories. A story of self, which all of us have, which all of us have many stories of self. And a story of self is a personal experience that we can share with others that shows what matters to us, something that's valuable to us, and why we're moved to take leadership in the way that we do. By sharing our stories of self, we start to see that we are moved and motivated by common things, by common experiences and common values. From those common values, we create a story of us, which is a story of our group, our team, our community, our company. The values that make us special, make us a group worth fighting for. And then finally, the third story in public narrative is a story of now. And this is a story that defines what is the challenge that is in front of us today. What is the risks if we do not rise to this challenge? And what's the opportunity if we take the right actions? What's the vision that will help us know the right strategy, the right actions to take? And it ends with a call to action, which are the commitments we need to make in order to achieve this collective goal. So these three stories are interlocking, they work together. The story of self is how we understand each other. The story of us is how we understand us as a group, why this group is worth fighting for, what are the values that will guide our actions in the future. And the story of now is, what do we need to do? Right? And each of these three stories is necessary, and we each need to share and connect these stories, individual stories to the collective stories, in order to mobilize in the face of a difficult and uncertain challenge. In the following video, you're going to see an example of a story of self by Malala Yousafzai.